Hello all. I am Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President. Welcome to this special live stream event on women's inclusion in Afghan peace talks. I'm joined here in person by Ambassador Adela Ross, Permanent Representative of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to the United Nations, and shortly we will be joined by a distinguished delegation of Afghan women participating via VTC from Kabul. We will be joined by Onabak Payab, advisor to the First Lady of Afghanistan, Hasina Safi, Afghan Minister of Information and Culture, Nadima Sahar, head of the Technical Vocational Education and Training Authority, and Aisha Khurram, Afghanistan's youth representative to the United Nations. This event was originally planned as a public policy forum as part of the UN's 64th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. But following recommendations that the session be suspended and all side events be postponed due to concerns over the coronavirus, we made the decision to take the conversation online and forego a live audience. This issue of women's inclusion is just too important and too urgent to postpone. And it is perhaps indicative of the coming challenges women face in Afghanistan that maybe we've had to innovate a bit to ensure that this conversation moves forward. In fact, we've already started the discussion via Twitter several days ago. You can follow along at hashtag Afghan Peace Chat and hashtag CSW64 online. I encourage everyone watching to engage with us online at IPINST on Twitter or on International Peace Institute's Facebook page. We'll be taking questions and comments from social media a little bit later. As anyone who follows the international news, even casually, should be aware, recent months have represented a critical period for the people of Afghanistan. Presidential elections were held in late September of last year in a contest between old rivals, President Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah. By all accounts, the election was extremely close, and official results were not released until February 18th of this year, when the Afghanistan Election Commission declared President Ghani the winner with just over 50% of the vote. However, Chief Executive Abdullah refused to recognize the results and also declared himself the winner. Meanwhile, the United States government continued its talks with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar, arriving at a deal on February 29th, arranging for the withdrawal of U.S. troops and setting the stage for future intra-Afghan peace talks. However, the disputed presidential election and a controversy over the U.S. agreement on prisoner exchange without government approval has complicated matters significantly. Just a few days ago, on March 9th, President Ghani and Abdullah held dual competing presidential inaugurations, with President Ghani getting an important boost from the attendance of members of the international community, including Zalma Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghanistan, senior UN officials, and other diplomats. And finally, most recently, just on Tuesday, March 10th, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution welcoming the agreement signed between Washington and the Taliban as an important step toward peace in Afghanistan. These events are moving rapidly, and so here we are today, March 12th, looking ahead to next steps. As was emphasized in a recent meeting of the group of Friends of Women in Afghanistan that I had the privilege to take part in with you, Ambassador, this is a critical moment for Afghan women. Over the past 20 years, there has been a tremendous amount of progress with women's rights and inclusion in Afghanistan. And with peace talks on the horizon, there is a strong sense that deliberate action must be taken to preserve that hard-won progress. And key to that will be the full participation of women in the peace process. And as was discussed on Tuesday at the Group of Friends meeting, this is not only about women's rights, but about the success and durability of the peace process for all Afghans. As we know now, research has shown that women's meaningful participation in peace processes increases the likelihood of reaching a lasting agreement for a sustainable peace. There is so much to talk about, but I thought we could begin with you, Ambassador. Could you give us your assessment of the current situation for women in Afghanistan? How would you characterize the progress of recent years, and what are some of the remaining challenges?
Sure. It's an important time for Afghanistan in many ways, and the way you described, and especially for women in my country, because I said this on Tuesday as well. Afghanistan, like many other countries, women have paid the ultimate price for conflict. So in terms of being prepared and ready to look forward to an end to conflict, that's absolutely a desire from women in Afghanistan, from the government of Afghanistan, and from the people of Afghanistan. But what is also really important and critical, not only for women, but for the government as well, is that how much we're able to in terms compromise in order to have an agreement. And I think there are much that the government has shown and expressed already that and taken very courageous steps to move forward for long-lasting and dignified peace. But one area which is a very strong commitment by the government, and as well as an area that the government has said will never compromise, that's women's rights. Because women empowerment in Afghanistan is real, it's genuine, it truly has happened. It's one of the investments, I always say that the international community's work truly paid off in terms of where we have started 19 years ago and where we are. I think for most of us today that you have at the panel, I think this journey would have truly been not predictable 19 years ago, and today it is 19 years ago during the Taliban regime. So 19 years may seem too long, but for a lot of us, it's not too long in a sense because we still remember the dark days of the Taliban. So we actually do know what it meant to live under their regime. And that's a very natural reaction to have, to be concerned, to be worried, to not know once they join the political structure what type of constraint they might bring in. Or I think it's not only the constraints, I think it's more of a bigger question of what would be negotiated at the peace agreement. And more you hear from us, I think we're not afraid of a negotiation, but what we are really trying to emphasize is that our constitutional right needs to be protected, because Constitution anymore is not a piece of paper for a lot of us. It's truly a document that protects our equal right, our civic right, which is the right to vote. I think it's something that I always say in a lot of developed countries, you may take it as a given right to you, but for a lot of us, it wasn't a given right. 19 years ago, we tried to negotiate that and make sure it is part of the Constitution. And today, I think we're really keen to make sure that it is protected. And not only women's right, it's minorities' right as well. It's human rights. So I think the true or the unique values that today Afghanistan is known for freedom of media, freedom of press. And so these are what all women in my country and the younger generation, including the government, we have said it very strongly, and we are committed, and we truly do not want to negotiate that away. I always say, look, we're able to compromise the past for being able to coexist with a group of people that we have been known for committing a lot of crime, but it's so hard to compromise the future.
Thank you so much. I think that makes it very clear that the government will go into the negotiations with a very strong position on these issues. But as you note, there's still a great deal of anticipation and anxiety about what will happen once the negotiations begin with the Taliban.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us what, in your mind, would an inclusive process look like that would be successful in bringing these issues to the table? Bring women's voices to the table with the Taliban?
So it has two sides, I think, answering your question. An inclusivity from the government side and an inclusive negotiating team overall. The government has said it many times, and as a government representative, I think our commitment to have an inclusive negotiating team is true and real. And that inclusivity for us means inclusion of women, the voice of youth, and different ethnic groups. So I think that commitment is there. But what I've always highlighted, which is the second part to your answer, an inclusivity of the team overall, which means those who are facilitating the talks and facilitating the negotiation, they also have a strong voice, because we do know that team probably will have specific seats dedicated to opposition parties on the ground. And how much those parties are committed to those inclusivity is also a really, really important question. A question that for a lot of Afghan women were concerned, and we're trying to find out who would they appoint, and would they have women, would they have voice of youth, would they truly be genuine and committed to, as you said, the 19 years of gain we have made in the last 2 decades in Afghanistan. So I think it's a difficult answer, and one way it's very simple as well if I answer on behalf of the government. But if as an Afghan citizen, if I answer that, I think my part is the part I'm also concerned is that how our political parties, especially the opposition, how would they react or, in a sense, represent those voices that were very keen to be part of the talks.
So on Tuesday at the UN's Group of Friends meeting, Group of Friends of Women in Afghanistan, the feeling in the room was tremendous support from the international community for women in Afghanistan. The outpouring of support was quite palpable. International support during this process will be critical. How should that support take form? What would you like to see from the international community to support Afghan women during the peace process?
It's a really important question. I think support in many layers. One, I've been always saying, and I've said it at the UN as well, and different platforms. I said, this is the time you need to be engaged, you need to be vocal, you need to be standing on shared principles that we have fought for in last 19 years. And those principles are very simple in a way, and especially here in New York, or being at the UN and speaking with the international community, or reflecting on Tuesday, I think you saw that strong cohesion and that strong solidarity from the international community on those specific ones, which is rights of women, rights of minorities, human rights, freedom of expression, youth, children's rights, youth representation. So these are and democratic values. I think the Afghanistan that is today, I think the new Afghanistan that we constantly talk about is those values that needs to be protected and highlighted, and actually highlighted in a sense that these are the achievements we have made, and then engagement by the international community to constantly echo that as much as possible. That's number one. And then when I said engagement in the right way and in the most effective way, as I said, as a terms of facilitator, as a terms of political allies, as allies of Afghan women, allies of the government, allies of youth in Afghanistan. I think that more than any other time, we need that support. And it's not a lot on the monetary side, it's a lot on the political side, and that political support that needs to exist. And also, I think, be realistic too, with the politics and the domestic politics that are happening in Afghanistan. You heard most of my colleagues on Tuesday that the complexity of what we are facing right now in Afghanistan, it's not really simple of truly defining and saying, look, there is a local entity who are local insurgent groups who are against the government or against current institutions. It truly is more of a regional dynamics and playing as well, and be realistic to that as well, meaning we have it's the nature of politics today, unfortunately. We have states who are involved, both in domestic politics and both in the insecurity side of the country as well. So I think it's beyond, how I'm going to say, it's beyond the regular engagement that the international community in last 5 years had. I think it's a more of hands-on, more of in a positive way, because the domestic politics are very critical and very sensitive, which a lot of time when we reflect, we say, oh, look, if it was left to Afghans themselves, we would have been able to handle it. But a lot of it at this time is not left to us, and there are still hands from outside. So, so I think that would be where I'm going to say what we would like to see from the international community. But truly, I think on Tuesday it was again a reminder of that gratitude we have to most of our friends and allies for standing with us in the most difficult days and standing with us today as well, because there was a very, very strong voice. And I think it was an encouragement to most of us as a government representative, I'm going to say, as a woman, and I do count myself as being part of the younger generation too.
Very good, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I think that's right. It was really was, as I said, quite the commitment of the international community today is quite strong. But as you indicate, there is going to be a need in the coming period to really step up that engagement in a real concrete way as the inter-Afghan peace process moves ahead. So we are here in New York, right across the street from the United Nations. But one of the great wonders of modern technologies is that we have our panel is in Kabul. And so we're going to turn now to our distinguished delegation in Kabul, and we will start with an intervention from Ms. Onaba Payab, Special Advisor to the First Lady of Afghanistan. Onaba, please, could you give us your thoughts and reflections on some of these questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you wonderfully. Thank you.
Dr. Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't log into the link, so I'm joining you through my phone. It's an honor to be with you today virtually, and I'm grateful to our Afghan UN mission in New York and the International Peace Institute for organizing this very timely conversation on women's inclusion in the Afghan peace talks. I echo with what Ambassador Ross said regarding the situation in Afghanistan and Afghan women. And I would like to say that Afghanistan is a nation that, despite challenges, embodies values and core principles such as democracy, human rights, rule of law, and peace, that no other people have demonstrated such strong commitment to these values under as difficult circumstances as Afghans. Just 3 days ago, on Monday, according to the Constitution of Afghanistan, we had the oath-taking ceremony of the president-elect. And it reminded me that despite that the Taliban had declared war against the elections, almost 1.1 million people voted, of whom 31% were female, Afghan women. They went out of their homes to vote not for a person, but for democracy, for women's rights, for freedom, for their peace. Ladies and gentlemen, the Afghan government and the international community, no doubt, have invested vast resources seeking to improve the status of women in the country, primarily through programs to support women's leadership. Many women have emerged in positions of national significance in politics, business, and civil society. Now, more than 5,000 businesses are women-owned, and women make up more than 25% of the Afghan parliament. Today, we have protective legal frameworks for women, public and private institutions with women's rights agendas, national long-term plans designed to empower women in rural and urban areas. And over the past 5 years, we have a publicly active First Lady who has been working to empower Afghan women and amplify their voices. Now, the key priority, as Ambassador Ross mentioned, for everyone is building a comprehensive and inclusive peace process geared at achieving a political settlement to the conflict to secure a dignified and sustainable peace that will not only benefit Afghan women or Afghans in general, but also the region and the whole international community. And I must say that Afghan women were the first group of citizens to unite nationally around an agenda for peace. Last year, in February of 2019, 15,000 women were consulted from 34 provinces on what would be acceptable to them in a peace agreement, and 3,000 of them came to Kabul for a consultative jirga and ratified a declaration for peace. Now it's crucial for these Afghan women to be at the negotiating table. We Afghan women have said this over and over again, that Afghanistan of today is not the Afghanistan of 1990s or even 9/11. We value our constitution and aspire to achieve democratic stability and economic self-reliance. We have spent 3.5 decades of our life in war. Now this war must stop. We demand that talks must happen between the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and the Taliban. We do not only want to preserve the gains we have made in the past 19 years, but also to advance on those gains in the coming years. As Dr. Rupal, you mentioned that we know for a fact that when women participate in a peace process, the resulting agreement is 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. We, Afghan women, will not quit. We know that peace is achievable, and we are moving towards it in a sustainable manner, guided by the principles of inclusivity, dignity, and sustainability. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anaba. I think the commitment of Afghan women to pursuing this, protecting their hard-won rights through the Constitution is really important. And there was actually I don't know if I say a debate, but there was a discussion at the UN at the Group of Friends meeting between optimism and pessimism. And Dr. Osala Nemat made the point that she's an optimist because, as you say, women in Afghanistan have fought for their rights under much more difficult circumstances and times. And as you say, that Afghanistan as a country has demonstrated such a strong commitment to these principles under such difficult conditions that speaking to you all really does fill me with optimism about the chances for the future. Thank you. We'll turn now to Hasina Safi, Minister of Information and Culture for Afghanistan. Hasina, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning to you and good evening to the people who are listening and watching us in Afghanistan. Let me first thank you very much for providing this great opportunity, which was very much needed at this point of time. We really recognize the very energetic and hard work of our very strong young diplomat, Ms. Ross, for facilitating this opportunity. And also, I would like to thank IPI for joining us with our advocacy. And I'm sure after they're listening to this panel, we will have a very strong backup in the coming process. Let me start with a very small example. The Minister of Information and Culture that you see today started when she was 15 years old as a librarian for Afghan women refugees in Pakistan. So providing the opportunity in the last 20 years is today that you see the Minister of Information and Culture leading the issues of women in Afghanistan for the coming generations and for the daughters, Afghan daughters who are following us. I would be very brief in 2 sentences. Doctor, we started from participation. We started from capacity building. In fact, we entered participation. We figured out that our participation was not very meaningful. We advocated for meaningful participation. And today we have a full and committed support of our government. Nevertheless, it is worth mentioning that there is a great contribution of all the women around the world who supported us in this process, and all those committed partners who supported us for what? They supported us for the agendas which we required their support. So that is the result of what you see. Secondly, I would like to say that we started from capitals because the capitals were the securest places to start. We went to the provinces, we went to the districts, and today, through a very big national program and also through the very active women organizations, civil society organizations, youth networks, we are almost in every district of Afghanistan. There has been unmeasurable achievements and gains, which you can very much list in all the policies and all the strategies which are made for the participation and development of Afghanistan. Whether it is women, whether it is youth, whether it is civil society. So what I would like to say here that today Afghan women can address themselves starting from their smallest community, which is their home, to their villages, to the districts, to the provinces, to the capital, to the region, and to the world that today we are connected to you. Secondly, okay, we made the policies. Now, what are we going to do? There is a newspaper in the United States, I have forgotten the name, maybe you can search it later on. In 2011, I said that we needed to walk the talk. So today we need to walk the talk. Today we need to make all the policies which are made for the women of Afghanistan to bring it into implementation. Whether it is government, whether it is civil society, whether it is public. I will not repeat what my friend Ms. Raz and what Onaba said about what we have done in order to be efficient with the time, but we have all the strategies and policies and we need to implement. So what do we need from the international community? Definitely, we need the international community to back us up based on our requirement. We know that the reason that the international community is standing with us, we recognize their role, but it is very worth mentioning that when you said that there was a great feeling last Tuesday. Now, we would like to understand the definition of that feeling. We want to see that feeling in a concept. We want to see that feeling through a strategy which is designed and defined by Afghan women themselves. That is what can really help them. So whether it is IPI, whether it is our strategic partner, United Nations, United States, EU. So the backup and the support which they are planning, it should be based on our suggestions and our need and requirement. The other thing which I would like to say that you said it is a critical moment for Afghan women. It is not only a critical moment for Afghan women today. It has been critical moment all the time because they all the time had to fight and get for all the rights which they needed. Now, how can we gain? How can we keep the gains? The most critical two processes or the most vital two processes were the election process and now it's the peace process. The election process passed. We, with all the risks and also all the security, and for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, we had the election, biometric election or electric election we had. So the women, 31% of the women participated, which showed their commitment that they really want to take the risk in the future and they want to be a very active member of the development of their country. The second thing, now it's the time of the peace process. As I see your name and your experience, International Peace Institute, I'm very sure that you know about the different stages of peace process, which is the pre-negotiation process. The pre-negotiation process takes us to the negotiation, to the post-negotiation, and to the implementation of the agreement. The first thing which we would like is that the women have to be included. We are very committed about the government that they include the women based on their own suggestion or their own coordination. We would like also the international community to support us with the stakeholders. As you know that in a peace process, we have relevant stakeholders, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. Then internal stakeholders are definitely coordinated through the government of Afghanistan. But we would like the international community to be very honest and committed partners for the implementation of the very fundamental basis which we gained in the last 20 years in the upcoming peace process. So when the stakeholders know their roles and responsibilities, what is our objective? Our objective is peace in Afghanistan. Peace for what? Peace for a man, peace for a woman, peace for a child, peace for a girl, peace for a journalist, peace for an artist, peace for a singer, peace for a dancer. So these are all the relevant experiences and stakeholders that the international community help. How can they help? We know that the international partners are also from different aspects supporting the opposition or they are coordinating with them. So they really have to make them understand that this Afghanistan is not the Afghanistan of 1995, where there was a woman who could not introduce herself in front of a foreigner. Today she sits and she analyzes and she reasons and she fights for her role, for her existence, for her very meaningful participation in the process. So that is one of the requirements which we would like the international community to see. The last thing which I would like to say is that it is very easy to say there has been gains in the last 20 years. How can we keep it? See, what is the gain? The gain is the structure. The gain is the organogram. The gain is the system. The gain is the respect. So we cannot remove that all. We really have to be cautious. The last 2 points which I would like to say before concluding is that we would like all the policies implementation, and we definitely want the international community to back us up. Starting from IPI, wherever you have access, you have to start from today with the implementation of the policies. The second thing is be very honest and committed partners in the peace process, starting from the pre-negotiation to the post-negotiation. And the other thing is we have a very fundamental document by the name of Constitution, which presents us all standing on it. We would like you to support. And even in the future, if there is any plan of amending it, no touch to those articles which gives the women's right and gender equality. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. There's so much there. I think for me, one of the key takeaways from both these remarks is that it's fundamentally important that it is understood that the starting point of this peace process is not the Afghanistan of the 1990s. And I think, Minister, you are a living embodiment of the progress of the last 20 years as you tell your story of, and give advice of how women can mobilize from the ground up, and that what you need from the international community must take that as a starting point, that it has to be a need-based approach based upon what is required by Afghan women and by the Afghan community and the Afghan people, and a strong call that it's good that there's this good feeling of support, but there has to also be a concrete strategy behind it. And you're absolutely
with
right.
us.
Absolutely,
Coordinated with us.
Coordinated and begun. The needs assessment has to come from you, I think, is the point that I am making. Absolutely. But also this point that it's not something that can be just sort of dropped in and then taken out. Peace is a process. Right now we're in the pre-negotiation stage, and then there's negotiation, and then implementation, and this is going to be a long process that will require sustained engagement with a multi-stakeholder approach, and that will require a long-term commitment. I think that is fundamentally rooted in the needs and the assessment of the Afghan people themselves. So thank you. It's really, really helpful remarks. Did you want to respond? No. So now we'll turn to Ms. Nadima Sahar, head of the Technical Vocational Education and Training Authority. Nadima, please. The floor is yours.
A very good morning to you all. Let me begin by saying how grateful I am to be part of this timely and critical discussion today. Echoing what Her Excellency Ambassador Ross and also my colleagues said about the peace process, very similar to them, I am hopeful about the process, but also equally concerned. I'm hopeful because of the gains that we have made during the last 19 years. The fact that women such as myself could not bear of getting an education, say in 2002, but today we have kids like my 8-year-old girl who aspires to become the first female president of the country. Today we have girls like Fatima Qadiriyun, a 16-year-old girl who heads the robotic team, who aspires to become the first female Afghan astronaut. They are not the only two examples. Today, we have thousands of other ordinary girls and women dreaming of doing extraordinary things, all because of the commitment of the leadership of this government and the support of His Excellency President Ghani, and also Her Excellency the First Lady, to women's rights advancement. So these are the gains that have been made so far that make me hopeful. The fact that we have an Afghan ambassador sitting at the United Nations today definitely is something that makes me hopeful about the future of this country. Now, coming to the concerns, there are concerns related to the process. I think much like any other political process, there are certain prices that need to be made and certain compromises that have to be made. And my concern is that those prices, what they are and who needs to pay them, there is not really much clarity surrounding that. And I hope that they do not come at the cost of the gains that we have made during the last 19 years. Those gains have been made at the cost of our lives. I think I also normally have this conversation with my colleagues, and I say that we have to look at this differently. For a man, this entire process boils down to growing a beard or shaving a beard when it comes to the issue of Taliban coming to Afghanistan. But for us women, I think there is a lot more at stake. Our right to education, our right to live, basically our right to everything is at stake. That's why there are concerns and right. I think the number of women at the negotiating table needs to be increased significantly to ensure that this is an inclusively inclusive process and not an inclusively exclusive process. And I think, echoing again what my colleague said, there is evidence supporting that women's inclusion in the peace process could ensure that the process is both durable and also sustainable. An analysis of actually more than 1,187 cases of peace agreements that have been signed between 1990 and 2017 has indicated that women's inclusion in the peace process not only improves the outcomes before, during, and after conflict, but also significantly increases the durability. 64% less likely for the peace agreement to fail, and then 35% more likely for it to last at least 15 years or more. Now, the reason that women need to be included, I think one part of it is that if there is a decision that needs to be made for their future, they need to have a say in that. What is that decision and what price do they have to pay? But beyond that, I think there are also other evidence that suggests that women needs to be involved in this process. First, I think women take a more collaborative approach, and that enables them to navigate through the cultural and ethnic lines that may be involved in this process. So that definitely helps. Second is that women collectively are honest brokers. I think the fact that women, and more so Afghan women, operate outside the existing power structures and generally do not control any fighting groups, that means that widely they are perceived as being politically impartial mediators in the peace negotiation process, and therefore they could play a very good role in ensuring that we reach an agreement. Lastly, I think they could also play a very, very critical role in broadening the agenda. Evidence has suggested that whenever men discuss the peace process, their discussions normally revolve around military action, power sharing arrangements, and then also territorial gains. But women's involvement in the process would make sure that issues such as political and legal reforms, social and economic recovery priorities, and also transitional justice concerns are in a way discussed and also a part of the agenda, which will ensure that the reforms and any post-peace process settlements would be durable. So for those reasons, I think women's role should be ensured in the peace process, and not just one or two, but making sure that we have 50+1. Now, that is what we should be aiming for. And in addition to that, I think we should also aim that we not only preserve and protect the gains of the past 19 years, but also expand on them. I think that's something that they should push on once they are at the negotiating table. Lastly, in terms of how our international partners could help us in this process, I think being the strategic partners, the leverage that they have is making sure that by getting women into the negotiating table, is by making sure that certain concessions will be made by the Taliban. So in terms of that, and then also making or tying the development aid to women's rights and to those gains would help sure that they would also abide by them.
Great. Thank you so much. I think the points that you make about inclusion are really fundamentally important and square very well with some research that we've been doing here at IPI. As you point out, the stakes are in many respects higher for women, thus their access to the table is very critical. But as you point out, their inclusion is not just simply about protecting and expanding women's rights. It's about the very success of the process. And this is something that all Afghan people have an interest in. The whole international community has a very strong interest in the success of this process. And one of the reasons why the research shows that women contribute to the success of reaching an agreement and its durability is because they bring in these broader issues about not just ending conflict, but sustaining a long-term peace. And so that's a really, really important point. And then you started with some examples of the extraordinary hope that is presented by the youth of Afghanistan. And I think that provides a good segue to our next speaker, Ms. Aisha Khurram, who is the Afghanistan's youth representative to the United Nations. And I should thank you because you provided a very important tweet that I quoted at the Group of Friends meeting on Tuesday, which was, I think, commented by the moderator as a brilliant, genius tweet. So thank you so much for engaging with us over the last few days. Aisha, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, a very good morning to the moderators in New York, and a very good evening to all the amazing panelists here in Kabul. Thank you very much for bringing my tweets in the conference. That was I just saw that on Twitter as well. So thank you very much for having us today in this amazing discussion. In a very critical moment in time in our history. So having such kind of discussion is very much important for not only for Afghan women, but also for the future of Afghanistan and the new generation. Well, as you know, that Afghanistan is the only country in the modern history that has been at war for almost half a century. So this weariness is speeding up and among the international community and the world to find a way to resolve this conflict as soon as possible. So this weariness might cause some kind of concessions on the earlier promises being made by the international community to put women's rights and their inclusion in this process from a priority to just the subject of intra-Afghan talks. So it just moved from the attention of the international community, and especially from the attention of the United States, from an absolute priority to just the subject of intra-Afghan talks that we just witnessed in the US-Taliban agreement, and also in the talks that are going on right now. So the reduction in violence week was such a hope for all Afghans. I was in Kandahar during the reduction in violence week. Women and children, young people, they were enjoying their relative security situation and the relative peace that they had during that time, and you could easily go out for shopping during the night in Kandahar. So that was something very amazing, and we could actually feel that peace is on the brink of emergence. So I guess peace is possible, but right now, as we have saw in the US-Taliban peace agreement, there was no word mentioned about the women's rights. So that was quite a concern, and we have mentioned that with Mr. Khalizad whenever we got the opportunity, but what we heard was that it's just a subject of intra-Afghan talks, which make it more concerning for all of us, because it is something that was at first the absolute priority for the international community, and especially for the United States, that they should uphold to their promises that they made earlier. Actually, right now, women's inclusion in the peace processes is viewed as a gift granted, but it should be viewed as a strategic imperative at the moment, because over the last 18 years, Afghan women, through activism, through advocacy, and through local movements, they could actually have some local activities and have access to local people that they can actually contribute to the bottom-up approach the process. So they can very easily contribute to the bottom-up approach of the peace process, and I guess they have a great leverage on the peace process. If somebody is saying that, okay, we are working on how to make Afghan women have leverage on the peace process, they already have leverage on the peace process, and all negotiating parties, all warring parties right now, they have to take it under the consideration and take it into account. And I guess the inclusion of women is not only important for the fairness and inclusivity of the process, but it's also crucial for the durability of the peace process, because women today in Afghanistan, they're not only half of the population, they're also half of the potential, because they were the members of over the last 18 years of achievements that we had, and the great changes that we have seen in the society, in the economics, politics, in all aspects of life. So I guess today we are standing at a very important, it's a pivotal moment in our history, but we have to take it under consideration that women are today, if they are represented in the negotiating table, they should not only be included in the formal discussions, but they also have to be part of the design and implementation of the whatever agreement is reached between the negotiating parties. Because the women that I met in Herat, in Kandahar, in Mazar, in Kabul, the younger generation of Afghan women, the robotic girls team, the Cote-inspired students that are driving the digital future of Afghanistan that we have never seen ever before in the history of Afghanistan, that women have been such kind of passionate, and they have been very much in the forefront of progress in regards to the digitalization and the technology. But today they are leading the digital future of Afghanistan. So I guess those young generation of those young Afghan women, today they consider themselves as active partners, not as passive beneficiaries of agendas. So absolutely, they should be included, not because it's like a gift. They are half of the potential of Afghanistan. So when it comes to the international support, I guess first of all, I expected much from the U.S. peace agreement. At least women's rights issue needed to be one of the red lines from the U.S. side. But still, we have intra-Afghan negotiations that could be a game changer moment for the peace process. But when it comes to the international community, we had just days ago, we had the Security Council resolution, the 3513 resolution that supported the US Taliban agreement, which mentioned about the women's, young people's and the minorities' rights to be protected in the peace process, which was a great step. But I guess we expected more. We expected more because I always mention that the international community should become, especially the United Nations, should become the guarantor of Afghan youth and women's rights in the peace agreement. So that would be a quite big step to guarantee our rights in the peace agreement. But I guess the group of friends shows the solidarity and commitment of the international community to support the meaningful participation of Afghan women in the peace process. And the group of friends could be actually a catalyst to advocate for Afghan women's participation in the peace process. So I guess that's what can we expect from the group of friends and as well as from the international community. But actually the most important point is that we have to move from lip service to genuine commitment when it comes to international support. And as Minister Asina Safi mentioned, that we need a backup to reach the genuine commitment of the international community at the moment to lobby and advocate for women's inclusion. So I want to mention that as well at the end, that women's inclusion is important. Why? Because first of all, Taliban are not only the only party that disregard women's and undermine women's inclusion, women's capability. We still have a very male-dominated society and kind of mindset that women might lose twice more if they are not at the table. And having women at the table, not only physically, but also in all the decisions that are being made and decided, they have to be the drivers of all these changes that we might see in the future. Because right now, the future of the new generation of Afghanistan is going to be decided. So it's more important for us than for those elites that are sitting there at the negotiating table and discussing about our future. So we expect more, and we deserve to be heard, and we deserve to be included. So I guess unless we have the commitment, the genuine commitment of the government of Afghanistan, the international community, and the negotiating parties, we cannot have an inclusive peace. And any argument that is reached between the negotiating parties without women, without the representation of Afghan women, that could neither be a durable peace nor an inclusive peace. So I really hope that we would witness an inclusive intra-Afghan negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I mean, you make the point that young women in Afghanistan are not passive recipients of this process, that they're driving the future of Afghanistan, and they are leaders in their own right. And I think you clearly embody that yourself very much. So I really appreciate these words. And I think, as I think was mentioned earlier, the game is the structure, the design of the talks. Access to the table is critical, but also, as you point out very well, that the bottom-up upswell of action on the ground from civil society, from young people in the country, will be really important in elevating the voices of women to be a part of designing the peace that is the result of any negotiations. You make a very strong call that for the international community, lip service is not enough. And I think I recall that as part of our tweet chat that I mentioned earlier, there was a very strong statement that we don't want speeches, we want commitment. And I think that's maybe a good segue to move to my colleague Masuma Ramati, who is also a young leader, Afghan woman. And I understand we've got some questions from Facebook, and so maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the input from the tweet chat that we've had over the last few days, and maybe if we've got some questions for the panel from Facebook, you could share those. Masuma?
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for the ambassador for being here, and also the speakers from Kabul. Good evening. As Adam mentioned, we did launch a tweet chat, #Afghan Peace Chat, and we asked a number of participants to participate in the discussion, and I'm just going to share what they have said. So the number of tweets that we received were more than 100 tweets, and the number of participants were around 40, which is very, very impressive, and we are very happy to have been part of that. So I also like to share a tweet in Farsi. This comes from Farahnaz Frutan, who is an Afghan journalist based in Kabul. She says, زنان افغانستان در این 20 سال از میان خاکسترهای خود برخاسته و مبارزه را ادامه دادند. ما قربانی جنگ بوده ایم، نمیخواهیم قربانی صلح باشیم. The translation goes, in the past 20 years, women in Afghanistan arose from their ashes and continued to their struggles. We have been the victim of war, and we don't want to become the victim of peace too. Another tweet comes from an artist based in Kabul, Umid Sharifi. He says, an inclusive peace means that all Afghans, and especially women, Afghan women, are included, heard, and their voices matter. Another tweet comes from Global Network of Women Peace Builders, on the question that we ask how international community can support Afghan women. They say, by creating, it is the responsibility of the international community to collectively engage and support Afghan women and girls at all levels of the peace process. Give Afghan women the opportunity to lobby and advocate for themselves. Another tweet comes from Kabul, again, from Nilufar Ayubi. She says, a US-Taliban deal is not a peace agreement. Women need to gain ownership of the Afghan process, support an Afghan-owned peace process, promote the women, peace, and security agenda in Afghanistan. We also asked the participants, what are the key components of lasting peace in Afghanistan? They said, justice will be the key component for a sustainable peace. The peace that comes should heal the people's pains and sufferings. Otherwise, it will not be a durable and lasting peace. This comes from Sufia Ramyar, who is an Afghan student in the US. The other tweet comes from Afghan Women Welfare and Development Association, Kabul-based organization. They say, protection of Afghan women's rights and engagement of women, minorities, and youth fully and meaningfully in the intra-Afghan talks is one of the key elements for lasting peace in Afghanistan. This is one of my favorites. We also ask male allies support for women's participation in the peace processes. And this comes from a male journalist, Jamal Sajidi from Afghanistan. He says, the way to empower women in Afghanistan is to educate men. We live in a society where women's existence is not recognized. Everything in Afghanistan is masculine. In my opinion, if men want to support women, they must first educate themselves. So now I turn to the questions that we received from participants. The first question comes from Adila Ahmed from Kabul. This is very specific to Ambassador. She says that in the US-Taliban agreement, there was not mention of women's rights. So how to ensure the meaningful participation, quality and quantity-wise, of Afghan women as Afghanistan representative at the UN mission? So this is the first question. The second question is also from her. She says that all the time, Taliban said that we are not against women's rights, but we want that it should be according to Islam. So I think this should be elaborated and explained more in the negotiating table, what it means, what is which kind of women's rights they're talking about. Is it like before the years 2000, or it's going to be like today? Mm-hmm. And the last question comes from Sadaf Tahib. This is a question from our Twitter. She asks, there's no single woman in the Taliban team. Then how can we trust them that they will respect women's rights after they come to the country? So I guess this question could be for everyone. To the panelists.
I think these are, thank you, Musmajan, for sharing these questions with all of us, with all the panelists. These are really, really critical questions, and some of the panelists did make a reference, but with just the essence of having amazing panelists from Kabul, and I know there's evening at their end. I really would like to utilize this opportunity and would like to hand over the questions to them, and I would like them to answer, because Minister Safi is a government official, and so her line is my line and my line is her line, and as well as Ms. Sahar, and similarly to Nava, but she has her own independent voice. And Aisha is totally independent. I think she has a very unique perspective that would be extremely important for the audience to hear. So if that's okay with you, Adam, I would like to hand over the questions to them.
Sure, throwing the hot question over to your colleagues in Kabul.
I would be here.
That's great. Perhaps maybe Minister, you could maybe go first and respond to the question, Hasina.
It's mute.
I think you're muted again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes, now, yeah.
Okay. So I would like to again thank you for this facilitation of the tweets. I think it will further help us and also facilitate the process, because all the people who have tweeted, I thank them. We are all, wherever we are in Afghanistan, we try to raise the issues and concerns. I totally agree with what Firozan, Mr. Umid Sharifi, and Dwelf, and all of them said. And that is why I also said that we really need to be very cautious about the various stages of the peace process. So it is not one person or one group. And also the reason that I emphasized earlier, and I want to follow up with the questions or with the remarks our friends raised, is because there is now capacity. So we do not want symbolic position or symbolic participation of women, because they have the capacity, whatever field they are their own leaders, or they are their own representatives. To come to the question specifically about the Taliban's team, I think that may be one of the agenda points which would be discussed when the formal negotiations started. So far, in the last 2 years, specifically last year, I had been almost in every meeting where His Excellency the President had met about peace process. So almost in 95% of the meeting as a woman, I was there. And I understand that there was no hidden agenda from the women from the side of the government. And that is what I very clearly state as a minister. So once the formal negotiation starts, I think that would be a part of the agenda that we would also like to discuss, because we believe that the women can raise up and reason their issues themselves. The other thing which I would like to talk about, involvement of women. This is also one of the areas which has started in the last 4 years or maybe 5, 6 years. And I always have one remark or one analysis about that, and I would like to share it now, is that we totally agree that we would like to educate the men, we would like to request or ask men to support us. But we have to be very cautious that we should not go to the very long struggle that we have come by involving men. We have to be very cautious not to give our authority back. So again, the authority should be with the women. Okay, those men, those brothers who would like to stand, they have to back us up. The way today, for example, I'm working, Nadima is working, Ms. Raz is working, Aisha, it means that we had the support and the backup of our male friends or family members. So that is one of the issues I think I would like to very much stress, and also for the new generation, for the youth, that we involve everyone. But this capacity is very much solid and very visible, that women have the capacity to lead the issues. So we have to have the authority. The more we have our authority, the more we can analyze and we can take decisions about our issues and ourselves. I think that would be fine. For me, it's fine. I would request our other two friends, in case I have something more, I will share with you.
Thank you. I think we still have Onaba on the line. Perhaps would you care to respond to some of these questions or react to some of the Twitter posts?
Hello?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Please.
Yes, I would like to comment on the tweet that we need to educate men. And for the most part, although that the men in Afghanistan have dramatically changed and they are supporting their females, as the minister mentioned, to get education and have a career. But still, in the rural areas, the promotion of women's leadership in Afghanistan is bound to encounter resistance from those who are unaccustomed to women's exercise of leadership and power. And these men remain largely disengaged and often alienated from efforts to promote women's leadership, which mostly they associated with physical attributes rather than intellectual capacities. So I'm still optimistic that in the near future we will have more men to support the Afghan woman. I didn't get the question clearly, but there was one question about Islam, Taliban Islam. And I would like to mention that we have been practicing Islam. Afghanistan is a Muslim country. 99% of the population are Muslims. But the Islam that the Taliban are talking about, their interpretation is totally different. I mean, if they want, our constitution is based on our Sharia law. And that's why we have repeated it time and time again, that this is our red line. If Taliban wants to change Islam, they have to be very clear with us that who are we now? Are we not Muslims? So it's very important for the committee, or the committee that our government would get together to have this intra-peace negotiation with Taliban, to draw a red line for our constitution that we will not gonna amend it, because in our constitution we have had provision on the equality of citizens' rights and freedoms, and we value this provision, and Afghans are embracing and embodying this notion of citizenship. One of the questions was about quantity and quality of women in the peace process, which the Minister Hasina Safi mentioned it clearly, that once the peace talks move on, we will know that what the government has planned. And there was a question about no single woman in the Taliban team. Well, of course, there were times that they were beating women in the street. There were times that they had restricted us from having our basic rights to go to education and have health facilities. So they were never going to value even their own women to bring them on the table. So these are the expectations of the people that cannot be met by Taliban. But of course, from our side, because we are a democratic country, we would definitely have women at the negotiating table. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Nadima, would you care to comment on the questions and any of the comments from Twitter?
Absolutely. Thank you. I think there were a number of very interesting tweets and comments and also questions. First, pertaining to education of men and the fact that it is the responsibility of us women to educate them so that we engage them as partners in this process. I beg to differ in this issue. I don't think it should be our responsibility solely to educate women. We are not rehabilitation centers. I think our responsibility should be to engage them. But I think if they want to have a say in this process, if they want to help us, allow them to educate themselves. I think that issue of awareness, education, we should really move beyond that. Our discussion as of now should be engagement, should be lobbying, should be advocacy, and not taking a step back and going all the way to education itself. Coming, I think, to the issue of making sure that we have women at the negotiating table, ensuring quality and also quality, I fully agree. I think earlier the discussion that we should have on the table. So it was purely a discussion revolving around quantity. Now there is a transition. I think now there is also discussion surrounding quality. That yes, having a good number of women at the table is key, is a must, but then also ensuring that we have the right women with a focus on the content that needs to be discussed. That is also something that I see getting discussed nowadays. So I think that definitely makes me hopeful that from quantity, we are moving to the content. That, okay, once we have women at the negotiating table, there also needs to be consensus on our red lines. And I think the fact that the First Lady's office had a consultative jirga, had more than many thousand women declaring their red lines could be a base for us to use at the negotiating table. Definitely, I think the focus should not be the sacrifice quality for the quantity. So having the right women and also the right individuals to represent us there. Another comment pertained to the interpretation of women's rights, specifically in the peace agreement, it says under Sharia law. Now that is open to interpretation, and I think that's a matter of concern. Sharia law, if we see that as a base, what kind of Islamic right for women? Do we want the kind that's being practiced in Indonesia, or do we want the kind that's being practiced in Saudi Arabia? So I think when it comes to that, there needs to be clarification, especially during the negotiation. So often it has been said that, okay, our rights needs to be in line with the Sharia law, but the Constitution is. So the fact that we are advocating for the protection and preservation and expansion of those constitutional rights should be something that should be emphasized, that it's very much in line with the Sharia law, with the Islamic laws, and nothing as to that. And I think there was one last issue. I may have missed it through my notes. I may have missed that point, but I'll come back again to that.
Great, thank you so much. I think this final point that you made to me is quite striking and important to note that the Constitution, of course, is in line with Sharia law as it is, and so it's about preservation and conservation of those rights that are already there in an Islamic constitution. Wonderful, thank you. Aisha, please, would you care to comment?
I think she can
Yeah,
use
very
it.
precisely.
Right.
I would like to add a few things. First of all, educating men. According to my experience, and during last few months that I was consulting with young men and women, I just started an online survey. So my respondents, 80% of them were men, and male, and just 20% of them were female. And one of the questions was, what is your red line in the peace process? And 80% of men, the first thing that they mentioned was women's rights. So you see, in the new generation of Afghan men, they care about their sisters' rights and they stand for them. So I guess right now we have our society transformed in terms of supporting women's rights. And I really believe that the younger generation of Afghan men, they really believe in women's rights and they really stand for their sisters' rights, and they will actually take it under consideration and actually and stand for it. But when it comes to the inclusion of women in it was not mentioned in the US-Taliban agreement about women's rights. Absolutely, I mentioned that before. That is a matter of concern. We really expected that. But we have a chance, which is the inter-Afghan negotiations, and I hope we really enter into the process much stronger and with consensus, and really make this issue, the issue of women's rights as human rights, a serious matter that needs to be considered in the intra-Afghan negotiations. But when it comes to the question of Sharia law, I guess having women religious scholars at the negotiating table is very much important. That I guess right now a lot of women rights activists are considering this issue and working on that. I hope it really works. And having them on the table would be really, really in terms of interpretation of the Sharia law from the woman's perspective and from a feminist lens. I guess that's very important.
Wonderful. Thank you. This has been such a fascinating conversation. There's so much more to talk about and react to, but we're just about out of time. And so I'd like to turn back to you, Ambassador. Would you have any final concluding thoughts, final remarks?
Sure. I think in my way, I also would like to echo my sisters from Afghanistan that thanks to the audience for watching us and being engaged with us for last 1 week and sharing their questions and raising this really important critical points that for some of us, I think we have started to think about it, but it's really helpful to have it more on the public sphere and started to have this negotiation, which we have started it. I think a lot have been said, but just a very minor addition. I think one is, as the government perspective, I think we have started to reach out to countries, Muslim countries, who have a really good experience of how they have been able to create the right balance between religion and civic rights and our laws according to Islam, which my colleague said it very clearly. I think our constitution is an Islamic constitution. So the government is an Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. So the religion is already incorporated, and that's why we had done our homework. In a sense, when we started to say we are trying to protect the constitutional rights of Afghan women, because we knew our constitution is Islamic and our constitutional rights are not in contrast to the religion. So that's why we do not even want to open that chapter for negotiation and talks. That's, I think, point one. And number two is also Taliban interpretation. I think I've been among many vocal voices as well as my other Afghan colleagues constantly saying that the Taliban position in terms of women's rights has not changed much. If we look at each single document, each single press statement that came from either from the talks or individually they have put it together, or even the famous New York Times article they had, or op-ed, it says the exact same thing they said 25 years ago when they came to Afghanistan and they took control of Kabul, the capital. They said the same thing: women have right according to Islam. And then when it came to the interpretation, as my colleague said, what those Islamic rights were, that's where the school of thoughts are changed and different. And at the time we were told, well, we are not telling you you cannot be educated. The response was you would be educated, but in Islamic schools, in an Islamic environment. And well, for me, it took 5 years. I stayed in country for 5 years, and none of those were delivered. So I think that's where our very real fear arrives. Okay, if we look back to Taliban and whatever they have said so far, from beginning of talks in Doha until the agreement being signed with the US and Taliban, their position on women had been the exact same thing. So I think that's where we started to reach out to our international community, and our government had become even more stronger to stand on those principles or those rights that have been granted by the Afghan constitution. And I think, I agree, I think there has been a lot said that some of these, I think the hard topic or the hard lines within the negotiation will start when the intra-Afghan negotiation starts. I always say that was the easiest part of the negotiation, to talk about withdrawal and having an agreement. I think the difficult part will start from now onward. The intra-Afghan negotiation will be the most difficult part, where we will come to all these critical questions that has been raised online, that had my colleagues pointed out, and we have been saying, and the government have been saying. But I also wanted to add a nuance. I think when we're talking again about the role of international community and looking into, like Adam, looking into what you have seen in other peace agreements in other countries, when you reach a negotiating table and you start to talk, you have to have something in your hand to trade off. Or a power or something that you are able to basically being able to discuss with the party you're negotiating, what are you giving and what are they bringing in. I think for us, to be really honest, I think if we have nothing left in our hand to go to the negotiating table and start to negotiate the most difficult part of the discussion, I think that's hard. And that's where I think our objective is, and I think especially from that coming from women a lot, is that we should have the international community with us when we start to discuss these really difficult points. The Taliban needs to know that they're not only negotiating this with Afghan government and people of Afghanistan, they're negotiating with the international community. Because otherwise, as I said, I think if it's an empty hand and we go to the table, then it's really concerning. And then they must understand it's not one party they're negotiating. They're negotiating with the international community, backing up the new Afghanistan that's standing on the principles that we have all worked together, on the principles that the government has put as being the red line for not being able to compromise that.
Fantastic. Well, it's been really a privilege to be part of this conversation today and all week. And I think, as you point out, the hard part is coming. The challenges are quite high. There's a need to be realistic about those challenges. But frankly, speaking to you, speaking to your colleagues in Kabul, such extraordinary leaders, I can't help but feel optimistic about the future for Afghanistan, and if I can call myself a male ally as a part of the international community, I really would like to pledge my support and anything that IPI can do to help. We're here.
Thank you.
And I think that you're absolutely right. The role of the international community and the need for the international community to help back the government so that there's leverage in these talks will be critical. And in any way that we can help to amplify that call, we will do so. So I look forward to continuing this conversation ahead. And thank you very much to our colleagues in Kabul and to everyone who was watching and the engagement on Twitter. Thank you all. Signing off.
Yeah, and my strength and energy is over there.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.